Hi, my name is Maria Dollard, and I guess when Colette rang me and asked me would I speak at this conference, I thought, well, what could I possibly have to say that would be relevant nowadays? But even as I listened to Louise this morning, I realised that a lot of my experiences would still be very relevant today. And that's a picture of my family there. There's 4 children and my husband and myself. The person I suppose I'm here to talk about is my daughter. I have 3 sons and 1 daughter. And that's my daughter in the middle, and her name is Lucy. And she's almost 20 now. So it's a long time since she's been in play school. And, you know, I could tell you stories about good experiences and bad experiences. And I guess a lot of the stories would be maybe some stories you might hear today as well. But I've decided that what I'm going to talk about is the experience that I had personally at that time when Lucy was under 5. And it's an experience that the vast majority of parents of children with disability go through. As I said, Lucy is almost 20 now. The little guy there isn't long since he's been in preschool, and I'm glad to say he's had a hugely different experience in his preschool, and I'll talk a little bit about that at the end. But so the kids are from 22 down to 7. So I've experienced all kinds of childcare, the creche, the childminder, staying at home myself. I've had all of them, and with varying degrees of success in different ways. I guess the thing about being a parent of a child with disability at that time when they're under 5 is that you are going through enormous transition. If anybody is familiar with a story called Welcome to Holland, it's widely available on the internet, and it kind of encapsulates for parents or for others who want to understand parents what it's like when you have a child with a disability. And the story it was written by a mother, and she explains how when you're expecting a baby, it's like planning a trip, a holiday, and you're planning to go, you know, somewhere really nice like Italy. So you learn a bit of Italian, and you do all your research about all the fantastic things that there are to see in Italy. And you get on the plane and you head on your way, and then just as the plane lands, the air hostess says, I'm sorry, there's been a change of plan and you've arrived in Holland. And you're less than impressed, to say the least, because you were really looking forward to your holiday in Italy, and it was what you dreamed about and planned for ages, and you find that you're in this different place, and it's not that it's a horrible, awful place. It's got nice things about it too. It's just not what you were expecting. And you've got to learn a different language, and you've got to find out other things about that place. And it's very like that when you have a child with a disability. You don't even realise it at the time, but you're expecting a different child. And for some people, we'll say if a child is born with an obvious visible disability, the shock that you get kind of comes in the first few days. For other parents where the child may have a developmental delay, that kind of process is slightly different. But for those first 5 years, you're in a state of an enormous transition, emotional turmoil, and you become very, very sensitive to the environment. And like Louise spoke about this morning, parents have to look into themselves. They have to evaluate their own attitudes as well. Parents are no different. Parents of children with disability are no different from any other sector of society. You know, we grew up in the same kinds of cultures, we have the same kinds of biases and prejudices, and we have to learn how to deal with all of that and to ask some very fundamental questions of ourselves. And that's, I suppose, as preschool providers and teachers, that's the kind of space that you're occupying with parents of children with disabilities when you meet them. Sometimes the child will come to you with a label or a diagnosis, and the parents are saying, this is my child and they have cerebral palsy, whatever. In other situations, the child may not have an obvious disability at first, and maybe it's some kind of a developmental delay. And I think preschool providers and educators can play a huge role in supporting parents at that stage where maybe they're the first ones to see some slight differences in development. And it's important that you know how to communicate that with parents. So Welcome to Holland, you can check it out if you're interested, but it's a good story and it helps people to understand what it's like. So any transition, you know, that we go through, it's very like a bereavement. Transition theory and bereavement theory are quite similar in many ways. And, you know, even as a country, we're going through huge transitions at the moment. You know, there's been a huge shock to the economy and, you know, so it's a process that you will all be familiar with. At some point in your lives, you will have experienced these emotions for maybe other reasons. But it's very commonly associated with disability and for parents. And like I said, if a child is born with an obvious disability, then the shock is in the first few days. And, you know, it's a very significant experience. And for me, because my daughter has autism, the shock actually came when she was almost 5, believe it or not. I had been through various different processes, loads of different professionals, and people were reluctant, I think, to diagnose autism because we're talking about, like we were saying about the last time that Louise spoke was 1998. That's when my daughter started school. And people knew very little about autism at that time, and you know, people were reluctant as well to diagnose it because possibly there was very few services available, and you know, you don't want to name a problem because if you name it, then you might have to actually do something about it. So I spent a lot of time running around from one person to another saying, what's wrong with my child. So by the time I got the diagnosis for Lucy, she was almost 5, as I said, and I was expecting it, and I wanted it because I had decided what school I would like her to attend, and she needed to have this label in order to get the resources, and that has not changed either, sadly. But we needed to get that diagnosis. But when I actually saw it written down on paper, it felt like somebody had taken a sledgehammer and pumped me into the stomach. It was very significant. And I think that for a lot of parents, that feeling of shock that you really have to come face to face with, it can be very difficult, and it affects the relationships of everybody around you, your immediate family, and all the people that you come in contact with. And so it is, and it can happen, like I said, immediately, or it can happen a few years down the road. That's the image I chose for denial, because as you can see, it's an apple. It's a banana. It is an apple, really, but it's a banana that thinks it's an apple and keeps saying it's an apple and thinks if it says it often enough, it will be an apple. And for a lot of parents, you are in denial for a lot of the time, and you kind of think, no, it's not, it's not my child. It's not. Everything will be fine. And at the time, I was living in Limerick, and apologies to Limerick people now, but I had a lot of Limerick friends. And because I had attended the art college and I was teaching art and design at the time, and I had mentioned the A word, as my husband liked to call it, autism, and everybody around was saying, no, she's not autistic, she's artistic, like her mother. And I was going, that's it, she's artistic. There was loads of odd bods in the art college, she's just like them, she's just super artistic. So you keep kind of telling yourself that everything will be fine, and it's not really happening, And that can be very difficult, for preschool practitioners to deal with, because it may be very obvious to you that there's a problem. How do you have that conversation with a mother who's saying, no, everything's fine, it's grand, there's not a problem. So these are all issues that we have to, I think, realise are there. That's the angry thing that you may have seen. I certainly was very angry at times. I was angry with everybody, really. You're angry with people that you meet if there's any perceived slight, against your child. You get angry with, obviously preschool services. I got very angry with a few of them. You get angry with your family if they're not as supportive as you thought they should be. You get angry with society, with the government. You get angry with institutions, with service providers, everybody, because you realise that you're on the margins, you're on the edges of society, and that's not where you expect it to be. And you know, we all think we can insulate ourselves from those feelings of being personally attacked, but it's an emotion that the parent is going through for a whole pile of other reasons, possibly. Depression, again, I mean, that's something that comes and goes. And like I would say about this cycle of emotions, it doesn't ever actually go away. It's there all the time. Comes back at different times when different challenges are presented. Like last year, now my daughter left school, and when she turned 18, we had a birthday party for her, and I had some Chinese lanterns, and I had 18 of them, and I gave them to all my friends, and we lit them. And as the lanterns went up into the sky, my thoughts were, that's all her rights and entitlements have just disappeared into the sky because she's 18, and you don't get to have rights and entitlements to education. Louise mentioned the Constitution, and many parents of children with disabilities have had to resort to the Constitution to get an education for their children. But when you get to 18, those rights are diminished almost entirely, and you have to kind of start again, start from scratch, and you're at, the powerlessness is immense. You know, other people make the decisions, not you. Adaptation. Has anybody come across the Winnie the Witch stories? Winnie the Witch. They're good little storybooks, but there's one about Winnie the Witch and her cat, and her house is black, and her clothes are black, and everything in her house is black, her bathroom's black, and her cat is black. And she keeps getting annoyed with the cat because she can't see him, and she stands on him, and she steps on him, and he sleeps in her bed, and she doesn't realise, and she gets cross with him, and she tries everything to try and make him change so that she can see him, including turning him into a multicoloured cat. And that's the kind of the last stage of her transformation, trying to transform him. And he feels absolutely stupid and miserable, and he sits at the top of a tree, and even the birds laugh at him. And eventually it twigs with Winnie that what she's actually got to do is change her house. So she changes her house into a multicoloured house. So everything is brightly coloured, and then she can see the cat now because he's black. And I think that's a lot of issues to do with inclusion and diversity are about changing the environment, about changing how we respond to it, and changing the environment for the children that we work with, instead of trying to make them fit into what we're offering. I suppose in terms of obstacles, I would see there are many obstacles, to inclusion, and I suppose creating an inclusive and friendly atmosphere, where parents can go in and feel that their child is welcomed and wanted in that preschool. I can't tell you the enormous benefits that has on parents, because we go in with an expectation of rejection. So when you meet inclusion and welcoming, and people who are friendly and who, really want your child to be there, it makes a huge difference to your psychological well-being as everything else, because you're being brought in from the margins. You're now part of another community, and that's really, really important. And you're hoping your child will become part of that community. I think in terms of, there's a lot of work, and Colette has mentioned, one of the core, I think, modules that should be available in terms of training for preschool workers. And I work in training myself. And it's a pity that it isn't a core module. It is equality and diversity. It's a sort of an extra add-on. And I mean, that's something that policy could change without costing anything. Just make it a mandatory module. And, we'll say I work with a VEC, and they would have to deliver it. It wouldn't be an optional. Whereas at the moment, these things are optional. And because I can't control programme content, it's the managers who do that, and they're not aware that it's needed, so they don't choose it. They listen to industry, and industry needs who say other things, and they'll provide those modules. But if FETAC as a policy were to make it a mandatory module, that it would be very beneficial and very would have a huge effect, I think. Also, you're going to need to have a training, in different conditions, and how, for example, in autism, how it affects children's learning and ability to access curriculum. The communication, again, all those things that I have up there. Just quickly, as far as I'm concerned, inclusion is not, it's not a geographical place. Just because you put a child into a preschool does not mean they're included. It's about honest relationships, it's about feelings of belonging, it's about understanding differences, it's about valuing difference. It's an actual emotion. Inclusion is an emotion. It's a feeling that there are people inside the margins who actually care about you and your child. And finally, I'd just like to say to people, forget disability and think disability. And every child has abilities. And it's a bit of a stereotype, but as it happens, my daughter is into art. And that's a painting, a tile she actually painted there recently. So we try and focus on the ability rather than the disability. Thank you.